The night was broken by rain, not the kind that drizzles politely across the glass, but the kind that assaults it, a relentless torrent drumming like war on the windshield. The wipers swiped back and forth, useless soldiers fighting a losing battle. Each stroke smeared water instead of clearing it, leaving the driver peering through shifting waves of distortion. Thomas Rivera's hands clamped the steering wheel, knuckles white. His shoulders were rigid, every muscle wound tight as if his body knew what his mind refused to accept. This was no ordinary fare. In the back seat, a man leaned forward, voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "Don't stop. Not here. Just drive." Thomas flicked his eyes to the rearview mirror. The man's face appeared in fractured glimpses, passing street lamps painted sharp angles of light and shadow across him. His hair was plastered to his forehead with rain, his jaw trembling, not from cold, but from fear. The suit he wore was soaked, ruined. The fabric clung to him like a second skin, torn at the shoulder, smeared with something dark, something thicker than water. Thomas's throat tightened. He knew that stain. He didn't want to know it. What's going on back there? His voice was unsteady, more breath than words.
"You hurt?"
The man's eyes locked on his in the mirror. Wide, frantic, but not pleading, demanding, just drive. His hand slid forward, pressing something onto the console. A thick bundle of bills, folded once, bound with a rubber band.
"It looked heavy, obscene in its size, for you."
No questions. Thomas's hand hovered near the cash. His skin prickled as though the very air had changed in the cab, thickening into something charged. But his eyes weren't on the money. They kept flicking to the mirrors, headlights, 2 sets, approaching fast. He licked his lips, pulse hammering in his ears louder than the rain. "You see them?" The passenger whispered, leaning closer. His breath fogged the glass divider.
"They can't catch us."
Not now. The word sent a chill down Thomas's spine. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. He wanted to ask who they were. He wanted to ask what he had stumbled into. But then it came, the sound, a sharp crack.
Violent and unmistakable. The windshield bloomed into a spiderweb of shattered glass, the impact an inch from Thomas's face.
He jerked back, teeth clenching, the wheel twisting under his grip. The cab lurched. Tires skidded on the slick pavement.
Rubber screamed against asphalt. The man in the back seat shouted, "Go!"
"Don't stop!" Time stretched. The cab spun half a breath away from disaster, the smell of burned rubber filling the air. Streetlights fractured in Thomas's vision, the world breaking into shards of light and rain and fear. The headlights behind them swelled, brighter, closer, relentless. Thomas's chest heaved. He tasted copper at the back of his throat. His body screamed to run, but his mind was frozen on the money.
On the stain on the man's sleeve, on the bullet that had nearly ended everything. This wasn't just a fare. This wasn't just a night shift. This was a point of no return. And in that suspended heartbeat,
Thomas Rivera knew his life had just been torn open, and whatever came next, there was no going back. The world held still. Rain hung in the air like beads of glass. The crack in the windshield froze mid-spread, jagged veins of light suspended in time, and then everything began to reverse. The cab jerked backward, sliding not forward, but back through the wet streets. The headlights behind them receded, swallowed by the storm. The shattered glass reassembled, the spiderweb closing until the windshield was whole again. The wad of cash slipped off the console,
vanishing into nothing. Even
the passenger dissolved into shadow. The storm faded. The roar of the tires quieted. The scent of panic was gone. What remained was silence and a man, alone. Behind the wheel of his cab, a tired man with weary eyes, still working a night that had barely begun, and though he didn't know it yet, Though the city outside seemed ordinary and still, he was minutes away from the moment that would unravel everything, the moment that would carry him back to that nightmarish road, back to headlights closing in, back to glass shattering against his face. It all began with a choice, a late passenger, a decision so small it could have been overlooked, and the decision that would change his life forever. Hours before the storm, the city breathed differently. The rain hadn't yet unleashed itself. Instead, a fine mist clung to the air, leaving the streets slick with a faint shimmer. Neon signs bled into the pavement in pools of blue, green, and pink, their reflections trembling every time a bus roared past or a drunk stumbled from a bar doorway. Inside the cab, Thomas Rivera leaned back against his seat, eyes heavy, shoulders aching. The clock on the dash blinked 12:47 a.m. in tired red digits. The night was halfway gone, and he had little to show for it. He reached up, adjusted the mirror out of habit, and caught his own reflection. 45, though the mirror was cruel. Shadows clung to his face, deepening the creases at his temples. His once dark hair had thinned, the strands damp with sweat. He looked like a man who had spent too many nights like this one, waiting, circling, burning gas for a city that didn't notice him. Thomas rubbed the heel of his hand against his eyes. A dull headache pulsed behind them, the kind that came from too much caffeine and not enough rest. He told himself he'd quit coffee one day. He'd been saying that for years. The cab smelled faintly of old vinyl, coffee spills, and the lemon-scented cleaner he bought cheap at the corner store. The radio whispered static before finding its footing in a low jazz tune, saxophone notes curling like smoke. He wasn't a man who liked silence. Silence let thoughts creep in. Silence reminded him of bills stacked on his kitchen counter, of phone calls he hadn't returned, of a future that looked thinner than his wallet. On the dashboard, taped neatly to the right of the meter, was the photo. Elena, his daughter, cap and gown, smile wide and real, sunlight bouncing off her cheeks the day of her graduation. She was the one thing Thomas looked at when the night seemed endless, when his bones told him to give up. He glanced at his phone. A text waited from earlier in the evening. "Dad, can you send a little more for books this semester?"
"I'll pay you back as soon as I can." Thomas's chest tightened. He wanted to send it.
Just 50, maybe 100. But his checking account was already near empty, and rent was due in 4 days. His landlord was patient, but not patient enough to let another month slip by. He sighed, running his thumb over the edge of the phone before sliding it back into the cup holder. "One good fare," he murmured. "Just one tonight." The street outside was quiet, too quiet for a Thursday. He'd parked at the corner of 9th and Holloway, a usual haunt of his. The bars along that strip usually spat out customers around this time, people who laughed too loud, slurred their words, and shoved 20s into his hand just to get home fast. Tonight, though, Holloway looked deserted. The air hung still, waiting. Thomas drummed his fingers on the steering wheel in time with the saxophone. His eyelids grew heavy. He considered closing them, just for a second. Then a sharp rap against the window. He jolted upright, heart thumping against his ribs. His hand darted for the lock before he even looked. A woman stood outside, raincoat hood pulled up, her face shadowed by the neon glow of the liquor store sign across the street. Her posture was stiff, her hand gripping the strap of the leather satchel slung over her shoulder. Thomas pressed the unlock button. The back door opened with a squeak and she slid inside, exhaling as though she'd been holding her breath too long. "Where to?" Thomas asked, reaching instinctively for the meter. "Ashbury Heights." "North side." Her voice was low, hurried. He nodded, shifting the cab into gear. "Late night for you." She didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the rear window, eyes darting back and forth like she expected something, or someone, to be there. Thomas studied her briefly in the mirror. She couldn't have been older than 30. Dark hair stuck damply to her cheeks, her skin pale against the black of her raincoat. The satchel in her lap looked heavy, weighed down with something that bent the leather awkwardly. He turned his eyes back to the road. The cab pulled away from the curb, tires hissing through shallow puddles. The city rolled past them, shuttered storefronts with metal grates pulled down, the occasional streetlight flickering in uneven rhythm. A man pushing a cart piled with plastic bags, his silhouette swallowed by steam rising from a sewer grate. Thomas cleared his throat, tried casual. "Work up there?" "Something like that," she said. She didn't lean back.
Didn't relax.
She sat on the edge of the seat, shoulders hunched, hands tight on the satchel strap. Every few seconds she turned to glance behind them. Thomas noticed. He'd seen the look before. He drove people in fights, people hiding from someone waiting at home, people who carried secrets in silence. But this was sharper. This was fear, real fear, humming in her like static. He kept his voice calm.
If you're worried about something, I've been driving cabs in this city 20 years. Nothing surprises me, her lips pressed into a line.
She said nothing. They rolled through an intersection. A red light flickered overhead, and for a moment the cab was bathed in crimson glow. The woman shifted, finally breaking her silence. "Could you take the long way?" Thomas's eyebrows rose. "The long way?"
Yes, she spoke quickly, almost too quickly. Don't cut through Holloway. Go around, please, he hesitated.
The longer route meant more on the meter. Most passengers complained about that later, accused him of trying to scam them. But her tone wasn't the voice of someone worried about the fare. It was the voice of someone desperate. "All right," he said softly. "The long way it is." She nodded once, but she didn't lean back. Her eyes stayed locked on the rear window. The cab climbed north, weaving through quieter streets lined with old brick buildings, cracked sidewalks and rows of darkened windows. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional hiss of tires crossing wet pavement. But inside, the air was different, charged, like a storm just waiting to break. Thomas's fingers tightened on the wheel. His instincts, sharpened by years of watching people, reading moods, told him this fare was different. Something was coming. He didn't know what, but he felt it. And though his pulse should have quickened with dread, a small flicker inside him stirred with something else. Curiosity. The cab rolled through the northern blocks, headlights cutting swathes of pale light across rain-slick pavement. The storm hadn't started in earnest yet, but the sky was restless, clouds pressing low.
Swollen with thunder that hadn't yet broken loose. Inside,
the silence between Thomas and the woman in the back stretched thin. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was taut, vibrating with things unsaid. Thomas cleared his throat, trying to pierce it. "You sure you're all right back there?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes, reflected faintly in the rear view, were locked on the rear window again. She leaned closer to the glass, scanning the street behind them. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat but sharp at the edges. "Just keep driving," Thomas bit down on his response. He'd had his share of passengers who wanted quiet, who made it clear that his job was to drive and nothing more. But this wasn't that. This was something else. Her urgency wasn't rudeness. It was fear, pure and raw. He tightened his grip on the wheel, fingers tapping against the leather as if to bleed off his unease. His gut told him this ride was leading somewhere strange. His gut had been right before. They passed under a bridge. The sudden darkness swallowed the cab for a heartbeat, then spat them back into the weak glow of street lamps. That's when he noticed it. Headlights. Far behind them, maybe a block, maybe more, but steady. Too steady, Thomas's pulse ticked up. A single car following them wasn't unusual in the city, but something about it, the way it kept its distance, the way its beams never swerved or changed lanes, pulled at him. He adjusted the mirror. The car behind shadowed their movements perfectly. The woman noticed too. Her fingers clenched the satchel in her lap. They've found me. Her words were a whisper, almost lost to the hum of the engine, but Thomas heard them. They struck him like cold water. He glanced back at her through the mirror.
Who? She shook her head sharply.
Just drive, please. Thomas's mouth went dry. His instinct screamed at him to pull over, to let her out, to cut this fare short before it dragged him into whatever shadow she was dragging behind her. But something rooted him to the seat. Maybe it was the desperation in her voice. Maybe it was the thought of Eleanor, his daughter, who might one day need someone to believe her, to help her when no one else would. So he pressed down on the accelerator. The cab surged forward, engine growling. The headlights behind them surged too. The woman's breath quickened. "Don't slow down." "Not yet." Thomas forced his eyes back to the road. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then heavier. Each drop caught the glow of the streetlights, streaking the glass in silver rivulets. "Listen," he said, his voice rough.
"You've got to tell me what's happening."
"If I'm driving into trouble, I need to know." Her silence held for a long moment. He could hear the faint rasp of her breathing, the nervous scrape of her thumb over the satchel's leather strap. Then she whispered, "It's not safe for you to know." Thomas barked a humorless laugh, short and bitter.
"Lady, I'm already in it."
"Whether I know or not doesn't change the fact that car's on our tail." Her gaze flicked to him in the mirror. Something softened in her expression for half a heartbeat, then hardened again. "You'll understand soon enough." The words landed like a stone in his stomach. The cab turned onto Franklin Street, a narrow road lined with shuttered shops and graffiti-tagged walls. The following car turned too. Thomas's chest tightened.
His mind raced.
He thought about pulling into a police station, but the nearest one was across town. He thought about cutting the fare, pulling over and letting her out. But that would still leave him face to face with whatever was behind them, and a deeper fear, one he couldn't quite name, kept whispering that this was bigger than a bad fare, bigger than a petty argument or some jealous boyfriend. He adjusted the rear view again. The headlights behind them flared brighter, closer. The woman leaned forward suddenly, her voice urgent. "Take the next left." "Quick!" Thomas's hands moved before his brain caught up. He swung the wheel, the cab jolting onto a side street slick with rain. Tires hissed, the engine whined. The car behind them followed. "Damn it!" Thomas muttered. The woman's knuckles whitened around the satchel strap. Her breathing came faster now, a staccato rhythm filling the cab. Thomas felt heat rise in his chest. He wasn't a man built for this. He was built for long shifts, for broken air conditioners, for silent rides across an indifferent city. Not for chases, not for shadows in the rear view, but here he was. He pressed the accelerator harder. The cab responded with a guttural roar, pulling ahead, rain whipping harder across the windshield. The wipers screeched, barely keeping pace. The woman's eyes never left the mirror. "Don't stop. Whatever happens, don't stop." Thomas wanted to ask again, to demand the truth. But the words stuck in his throat, because deep down he already knew the truth, or at least part of it. This night was no longer his. The moment she stepped into his cab, the moment those headlights appeared in the mirror, his life had been hijacked, and it was only just beginning. The storm finally broke. Rain sheeted down in silver torrents, hammering the cab roof like fists. The windshield wipers screeched across glass that blurred almost as fast as it cleared. Headlights warped in the water, bending and stretching like ghosts. Thomas leaned forward, nose nearly to the wheel, squinting through the downpour. His pulse thudded in his ears. He could feel it in his throat, in the tips of his fingers clutching the steering wheel. Behind him, the car stayed close.
Too close.
Its beams flared in the mirrors, slicing across the back seat where the woman hunched low, clutching her satchel like it was oxygen. "Faster," she urged, voice taut as wire. Thomas gritted his teeth. This is a taxi, not a race car. They don't care. They won't stop. He glanced back at her, just for a heartbeat. Water streamed down the side windows, cutting her face into fragments of light and shadow. She looked younger in that moment, not 30 but 20, a girl caught in a storm too big for her. Fear hollowed her eyes. Thomas looked away before it cracked him open. He pressed harder on the accelerator. The cab roared, engines straining, tires hissing through rivers that pooled at every corner. The city blurred past, rows of shuttered shops,
dark alley mouths.
The occasional drunk staggering under an umbrella, staring as the cab tore by. The car behind them matched every move. Thomas's jaw clenched. He flicked the wheel left suddenly, then right, weaving through narrow side streets. The cab jolted over potholes, the suspension groaning, but the headlights never fell away. "They're trained," the woman whispered. The words stabbed into him. Trained, not random thugs, not some jealous lover. Whoever was chasing them knew how to chase. "Lady," Thomas growled, "you better start talking. Because right now I don't know if I'm saving your life or signing my own death warrant." She hesitated, clutching the satchel tighter. Her lips parted, then closed. Whatever words she wanted to say were drowned by the roar of rain. "God damn it!" Thomas spat. He yanked the cab hard onto Maple Avenue, a street that sloped downhill toward the river. The tires screamed, water splashing high against the wheel wells. For a moment, gravity seemed to take over, dragging them faster than the engine ever could. The pursuing car followed. Its headlights flared bright in the mirror. So close, Thomas swore he could feel the heat of them through the glass. Then, crack, a gunshot. Thomas ducked instinctively, hands jerking the wheel. The cab swerved, nearly clipping a parked van before he wrestled it back under control. The windshield quivered, but the bullet hadn't found it this time. The woman screamed, curling tighter into the corner of the seat.
"Don't stop! Whatever happens, don't stop!"
Thomas's breath came in ragged bursts. He was no hero. He was a cab driver, for God's sake. His world was supposed to be small, meters and fares, gas prices and rent checks.
Not bullets.
Not headlights hunting him through the rain, but his hands didn't let go of the wheel. He drove. The cab tore through the intersection at 5th and Maple, ignoring the red light, horns blaring from the cars that nearly clipped them. Rain blurred the world into streaks of red and white, but Thomas didn't lift his foot. Another shot rang out. The back window spiderwebbed, glass spraying across the seat. The woman cried out, ducking lower, her satchel clutched to her chest. Thomas's vision tunneled. Every nerve screamed at him to get out, to slam the brakes, to throw open the door and run. But where would he run? And if he ran, what then?
Leave her to them?
Elena's face flashed in his mind, his daughter, her smile, the way she'd looked at him at graduation. If she were in trouble, if she were running from something that wanted her gone, wouldn't he want someone, anyone, to stand between her and the dark? His grip tightened. He swerved left again, barreling down a narrower street lined with dumpsters and graffiti. The cab jolted, bouncing over cracks in the asphalt. The headlights followed. The woman leaned forward suddenly, voice sharp.
"Turn here!"
Thomas barely caught the alley she pointed to, a slit of darkness between two brick warehouses. Too narrow.
"Too reckless. No way we fit. I'll do it."
His hands moved before his brain finished protesting. He wrenched the wheel, the cab sliding sideways, tires shrieking as it skidded into the alley. The rear fender clipped a trash bin, sending it clattering into the wall. For a heartbeat, Thomas thought they'd wedge in and stall, but the cab scraped through, metal grinding against brick, sparks spraying in the rain. Behind them, the pursuing car swerved past the alley, too wide to make the turn. Its headlights streaked on into the distance before braking hard, tires screaming. Thomas's chest heaved. He felt sweat mingling with rain dripping from his hairline. His hands shook on the wheel, but he didn't stop. He kept the cab moving deeper into the narrow alley. The woman exhaled a trembling breath. For the first time since she got in, her voice carried something other than fear. Relief. "We bought time," she whispered. Thomas shot her a look through the mirror. His voice came out hoarse. "Time for what?" She didn't answer. Her hand stroked the satchel like a mother calming a child. Thomas wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth, to throw her out of his cab and wash his hands of it. But something heavier than anger sat in his chest,
A weight he couldn't shake.
because deep down he knew whatever she carried, whatever shadow she dragged into his back seat, it wasn't done with him. The storm roared louder, swallowing the city, and in that hidden alley, with the cab rattling forward and glass crunching under the tires, Thomas realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about her. It was about him now, too. And the night was far from over. The cab rolled to a shuddering stop. The alley spat them out into a half-abandoned loading yard, lit by a single flickering floodlight. Puddles stretched wide across the cracked asphalt, glowing pale yellow with each sputter of the lamp. The engine ticked, rattling in protest. Thomas slammed it into park, his chest heaving. The wheel left deep grooves in his palms. His throat burned from breathing so hard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the rain, hammering the roof and dripping from every ledge, filled the silence. Thomas turned slowly, eyes narrowing in the rear view. "All right."
No more running blind. You're going to tell me what the hell's in that bag? The woman didn't move.
She was hunched low, arms wrapped tight around the satchel like she thought even oxygen might steal it away. Her knuckles were bloodless, her hair plastered across her forehead. Thomas's patience snapped. He spun around in his seat, one arm slamming against the passenger headrest. "You hear me?"
People are shooting at us, at me. And I don't even know your name. Her lips trembled. Lydia? The name hung there in the damp air, fragile as glass. Fine, Thomas said, jaw tight.
"Lydia, now answer the damn question. What's in the bag?" Her eyes darted toward the back window, as if expecting headlights to bloom again at any second. Rain streaked down the shattered glass, turning the yard beyond into a kaleidoscope of ripples. "You don't want to know?" she whispered. Thomas laughed, a short, bitter sound that came out sharper than he meant.
Don't want to know?
"Lady, they just put a bullet through my back window. I think I passed the point of ignorance being bliss." Her gaze flicked back to him. For the first time he saw something cut through the fear. Not defiance exactly, but a kind of weary steel, like a person who'd been carrying weight too heavy for too long. She set the satchel on her lap.
Rain dripped from her sleeves onto the leather.
With careful, shaking hands, she unbuckled the clasp. Thomas leaned forward without meaning to, every nerve buzzing. The bag creaked open. Inside wasn't money, not jewels.
Not the glitter of some heist prize. It was paper. Stacks of it.
Files, folders, envelopes thick with photographs. Some edges were torn, others stamped with red ink that bled like wounds in the dim light. "What the hell is that?" Thomas muttered. "Evidence?" Lydia said softly. His stomach dropped.
Evidence of what?
She hesitated. Rain pounded harder, as though the storm was leaning in to hear the answer too. "Of men who pretend to serve this city," she said finally. "Of deals made in shadows.
Of blood paid so someone else can get richer." Her fingers brushed a folder at the top, smearing rainwater into its cardboard edge.
She pulled it open and shoved it toward him. Thomas caught a glimpse of black and white photographs, men in suits, faces he didn't recognize but felt he should.
Hands shaking with other hands.
Some seated at a long table, papers spread like a feast. In the margins, typewritten notes crawled like ants. Contracts. Wire transfers. And then something colder. A second photo slipped loose and landed face up on the seat between them. It wasn't a handshake. It was a body, sprawled in an alley not unlike the one they'd just escaped through. Eyes closed, blood smeared dark across the pavement. Thomas's breath caught this. His throat felt raw. This is politics.
Mafia crap.
Police stuff.
What the hell are you doing with it?
Lydia's eyes burned suddenly, not with fear, but with fury.
Trying to stop them. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't look away. Thomas shook his head, rainwater dripping from his hairline.
Lady, I'm a taxi driver. You think I'm built for this?
You think I can just, throw myself into your crusade because you waved some horror show photos in my face?
You already did, she said. The words sank into him, heavier than the rain, heavier than the storm. She wasn't wrong. The second he chose to keep driving, to turn into that alley instead of slamming on the brakes, he'd stepped into her war, and now there was no door marked exit. Thomas rubbed his face, the scrape of stubble rough under his palms. Why me? Why my cab? Her shoulders shook once, though he couldn't tell if it was from cold or grief.
Because you stopped. Every other driver tonight passed me by.
But you stopped. The silence between them stretched.
Rain hissed on metal.
Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded again. Thomas looked at her. Really looked. The damp hair clinging to her cheek, the bruise darkening along her jawline, the way she clutched those files like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. He thought of Eleanor again, thought of what it would mean if his daughter ever found herself this desperate, this alone. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Lydia closed the satchel, fastened the clasp again, and drew it back to her chest. Whatever was inside, it was heavier than any gold. They'll keep coming, she whispered.
They won't stop until I'm dead.
And now they've seen you.
That makes you a target too. Her voice was flat, not a threat.
Not even a warning. Just fact. Thomas's stomach knotted. His cab smelled of wet upholstery, engine grease and fear. He wanted to throw the car into gear and drive until the storm fell away, and the city shrank to nothing in the rear view, but headlights flickered across the far end of the yard. Both of them froze. Another car turned slow into the lot, its beams crawling across puddles like hunting dogs. Thomas's breath locked in his chest. Lydia's grip on the satchel tightened. The storm wasn't giving them a reprieve after all. It was only getting darker. The headlights crawled across the yard, slow, deliberate, like a predator that already knew where its prey was cornered. Thomas's fingers hovered over the ignition. His body screamed to slam the car into drive, tear through the puddles, and never look back. But his eyes locked with Lydia's in the rear view, and something in her stillness rooted him in place. "They found us," she whispered. The words didn't carry panic. They carried certainty. The floodlight overhead sputtered again, throwing the yard into jerking shadows. The new car rolled closer, water spraying from its tires. Thomas saw the silhouette of two men inside, both stiff-backed, both facing forward. Professional, not joyriders, not punks with too much beer and too little sense. These were the kind of men who fired shots in the rain and didn't blink. Thomas's chest tightened. He'd been in tight spots before, late-night brawls in bars he shouldn't have stepped into, back when his temper was worse than his judgment. But this was different. This wasn't his fight. He was in someone else's battlefield, and there was no cover. Lydia leaned forward, her voice urgent but low. "We can't stay here. They'll box us in." "No kidding," Thomas muttered, sweat slicking his palms. The other car's beams swung wide, illuminating the brick walls and rusted loading docks. Thomas's cab sat in the open like a deer in the scope. His mind raced. Left side of the yard was fenced with chain link. Right side? Stacks of rotting pallets and dumpsters. Dead ends everywhere. The only exit was the alley they'd crawled through, and he knew the second he tried to backtrack, the hunters would pin them in. So what the hell was left? The men's car eased to a stop 20 feet away. The engine idled, low and smooth, the purr of a machine built to run long nights. The driver's door cracked open. Thomas's pulse surged into his throat. A man stepped out, tall, broad shoulders under a rain-dark trench coat. His face was half hidden beneath the shadow of the brim, but the way he moved, the calm assurance, sent a shiver through Thomas's spine. This wasn't his first time hunting in the dark. The passenger stayed in the car, headlights still blinding. The man in the trench coat called out, voice steady over the storm. "Hand it over."
And nobody has to bleed tonight. Lydia's breath hitched, but she didn't answer. Thomas glanced at her in the mirror.
She was frozen, satchel clutched to her chest so tight her nails must have been cutting into the leather. He swallowed. His throat felt raw. "I'm assuming he doesn't mean cab fare." She gave the faintest shake of her head. The man stepped closer. Rain glistened off his shoulders, dripping down his coat in rivulets.
"Last chance.
"You can't outrun us."
You can't hide." "Give me the bag and you walk away." Thomas's hands tightened on the wheel.
He wasn't built for standoffs. He wasn't built for decisions like this, where one choice could redraw the line of his life. Lydia's voice cracked, trembling with a strange mix of defiance and despair. "If I hand this over, more people die." The man tilted his head, as though her words were little more than background noise. "That's not your burden anymore. Step out of the car." Lightning split the sky, white veins tearing across the black. The thunder rolled heavy, echoing through the brick walls. Thomas's instincts screamed at him, "Move. Do something. Don't sit here waiting for the bullet that ends you." But fear pinned him. His breath rasped shallow, his chest barely rising. Then Lydia touched his shoulder.
Just a brush. Barely pressure at all, but it was enough. He threw the cab into reverse.
Tires screeched as the car jolted backward, slamming through the puddles, spray exploding like glass. The trenchcoat man lunged sideways, raincoat whipping as he dodged. The car chasing them spun its headlights, jerking into gear. "Hold on!" Thomas shouted. The cab fishtailed, back bumper clipping a stack of pallets. Wood splintered, crashing down in the rain. He didn't slow. He swung the wheel hard, sending the cab careening toward the far corner of the yard, where the fence bowed under years of rust. The headlights behind them flared bright, closing in. Lydia braced herself, eyes wide.
"You can't watch me."
Thomas slammed the accelerator. The cab roared forward, engine screaming, water spitting from its tires. The fence loomed closer, its chain links rattling in the wind. For 1 sick second, Thomas thought the cab would bounce off and stall, but the rust gave way. The front bumper tore through, sparks spitting as metal screamed. The fence toppled inward, and suddenly they were out, bouncing onto a gravel access road that ran along the riverbank. Behind them, the second car braked hard, skidding sideways to avoid the collapse. Its headlights swung wild, then corrected, before surging after them again. Thomas's grip was iron on the wheel, knuckles pale. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break ribs. "Where does this road go?" he barked. Lydia's voice was ragged. "It follows the river. Toward the industrial district." "Good. Then maybe I can lose them in the maze." The cab rattled hard over the uneven gravel, every pothole sending shudders through his spine. Water sprayed high as the storm churned the river beside them. But the other car was still there. Its beams cut sharp through the night, steady as death itself. Thomas's jaw clenched.
"They don't quit." "They won't," Lydia whispered. Her words twisted the knife deeper.
He wasn't just running from bad luck anymore. He was running from men who had carved pursuit into their bones, and yet, under all the fear, something burned in his chest, a spark he hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was adrenaline.
Maybe it was rage.
Or maybe it was the stubborn fact that he'd been underestimated his whole life, and tonight he wasn't ready to fold. He snarled through his teeth. Then we make them quit." Lydia looked at him, eyes wide, lips parted like she wanted to argue. But she didn't. She just held the satchel tighter. The cab roared into the industrial grid, towers of steel and brick rising around them.
Rusting smokestacks.
Broken streetlights, shadows stretching long and jagged. Thomas swerved hard, skidding onto a side street lined with warehouses. The rain masked the sound of his tires, but the glow of headlights behind him proved the hunters weren't shaken. For every turn he took, they matched him. For every risk, they doubled down. The storm howled through the steel canyons, and as Thomas gunned the cab deeper into the maze, one truth clawed at the back of his mind. There was nowhere to hide, not anymore. The cab jolted hard as Thomas swerved into a narrow service lane between two looming warehouses. Rusted corrugated siding loomed on both sides, rain streaming down in silver ropes. His headlights painted slick concrete, dumpsters, and piles of broken pallets. "Here," Lydia urged, her voice sharp but hushed.
"Kill the lights." Thomas's knuckles whitened.
"If I kill the lights, I kill us. They'll see the glow from blocks away."
Trust me, her tone wasn't pleading anymore.
It was command. Thomas's throat tightened, but he obeyed. He snapped the headlights off. Darkness swallowed them, broken only by the storm's lightning and the dull glow of the dashboard. The cab rolled deeper into the lane, gravel crunching under its tires until Thomas coasted to a stop beside a loading bay. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was suffocating, only rain,
Only thunder. Thomas sat rigid, listening for the growl of the other car.
His chest rose and fell like he'd sprinted a marathon. Beside him, Lydia's breaths were faster, shallower, though she tried to mask them. Minutes crawled. Then, headlights swept past the end of the lane. Both of them froze. The beams sliced across the far wall, lingered, then moved on. The pursuing car thundered by, tires spraying water, engine humming like a beast denied its meal. Gone. For now. Thomas let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His hands trembled against the wheel. "We can't sit here long," he muttered. "No, but we can't keep driving blind either." Lydia's voice cracked just slightly, though she forced steel into it. She opened the back door and slipped out, hugging the satchel to her chest. Rain plastered her hair and soaked her coat in seconds. Thomas cursed under his breath, then shoved his door open. Cold water slammed against him, running down his collar. "You planning on standing in the open until they loop back?"
"Inside," she said quickly, pointing at the loading bay.
Its door hung crooked, rust streaking its sides.
"It'll give us cover," Thomas eyed it.
The shadows inside yawned like a throat ready to swallow them whole.
"Lady, I don't do horror movie entrances," her eyes flashed. "Do you want to live?"
That ended the debate. Together they hurried across the slick pavement. Their shoes slapped through puddles. The storm drowned their footsteps, but Thomas still felt like each one was too loud. The loading bay door groaned when he pulled at it, but the rust gave way. The gap widened just enough to slip through. He ducked inside, Lydia close behind. Darkness embraced them. The smell hit first: oil, rust, damp wood. Somewhere deeper in the warehouse, water dripped steadily like a metronome. Lightning flashed through the broken windows high above, cutting the cavernous space into silver fragments. They moved cautiously, their footsteps hollow against the concrete floor. Machinery sat abandoned in long rows: forklifts, steel drums, pallets stacked with crates whose labels had long faded. The air was heavy with dust and rain. Thomas's every nerve buzzed. He kept glancing back at the slit of light under the loading bay door, half expecting it to flare with headlights again. Lydia finally stopped near a cluster of crates. She crouched low, setting the satchel on her knees. Her hands lingered on the leather, as though the act of holding it steadied her. For a while, they just breathed. Rain hammered the roof above, filling the silence. Then Thomas whispered, All right, no more dodging.
Who the hell are you, really?
Her eyes met his.
Lightning flashed again, carving her face into planes of light and shadow. I told you. My name's Lydia. Yeah, but that doesn't explain why people with guns are chasing you through the city, or why you're carrying enough dirt in that bag to start a war.
You're not just some woman in the wrong place. Her silence stretched. Her lips pressed tight. He could almost see the debate inside her, the choice between truth and survival. Finally, she spoke. I was a journalist. Thomas blinked.
Of all the answers he expected, that wasn't it, was?
She nodded once, eyes lowering.
Until they shut the paper down. Until my editor disappeared. The word disappeared landed heavy.
She didn't mean vacation. She didn't mean retirement. She meant gone. Thomas's skin prickled. I was working on a story, she continued, voice low, about the men who own this city in ways the public never sees. Developers, politicians, a syndicate that launders money through contracts and washes blood off its books with ribbon-cutting ceremonies. My editor said it was too big.
Too dangerous. Then he
Didn't come to work one day. Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. I kept digging, too stubborn to stop.
And I found things, documents, transfers, photos. I don't even know how deep it goes anymore.
But I know they kill to keep it buried. Her hand patted the satchel, almost unconsciously. This is what's left.
The last pieces.
Enough to burn them if it ever sees daylight. Thomas felt cold all over, colder than the rain soaking his clothes. He looked around the warehouse, the shadows, the silence, and realized just how small he was compared to the machine chasing them. You're saying we're up against an army? She gave a hollow laugh. Not an army.
Something worse. An army obeys orders.
These men obey hunger. Her words echoed in the vast dark, swallowed by the dripping. Thomas rubbed his face, his stubble scratched against his palm. Christ, Lydia, you realize what this means? They're not going to stop until you're gone.
And now that I've seen it.
You're marked too. He hated how calm she sounded, like she'd already accepted it. For a long while, neither spoke. The rain kept time above them. Thunder rolled like distant drums. Finally, Thomas sat on an overturned crate, his shoulders sagging.
I should have kicked you out of my cab when you flagged me down. But you didn't. He looked at her.
She was trembling, whether from cold, fear, or both, he couldn't tell. But there was a fire under it, the kind that kept her moving when any sane person would have folded. No, he admitted.
I didn't. Lightning split the sky again, bleaching the warehouse white for a heartbeat.
In that flash, Thomas saw something in Lydia's eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just fear.
Not just defiance. Trust. It scared him more than the men outside, because now he wasn't just driving a stranger through the night.
He was tethered to her fight, and fights like this never ended clean. A sound shattered the moment, metal clanging against metal, echoing deep in the warehouse. Both of them froze. Thomas's breath hitched. Lydia's hand flew to the satchel. The sound came again, closer this time.
A steady scrape.
Heavy boots dragging against steel, they weren't alone. The scrape of boots echoed again, metal dragging against concrete. A rhythm that didn't belong to the rain, didn't belong to the storm. It was heavier, human, intentional. Thomas's pulse spiked. His eyes darted through the shadows. The warehouse stretched cavernous and dark, rows of crates stacked like walls in a maze. Every flash of lightning through the broken windows painted a different picture, shadows leaping and shifting as though the whole place was alive. Lydia crouched low beside the crates, clutching the satchel to her chest. Her lips pressed tight, but he could see the tremor in her jaw. Thomas leaned close, his whisper rough.
Stay here. She grabbed his wrist instantly. Don't you dare! He froze.
Her grip was stronger than he expected. Her eyes, even rimmed with fear, burned with a plea deeper than words. I've been running alone for too long, she whispered.
Don't leave me now. The words sank like a stone into his gut.
But the sound of another step, closer, heavier, snapped him back. Thomas gently pried her hand from his wrist,
"I'm not leaving, just—"
shifting the odds. Before she could protest, he slid low, keeping his body close to the ground as he moved along the row of crates. His breath came sharp, shallow, each inhale loud in his ears. The scrape came again, this time followed by a faint, metallic click. A gun. His stomach turned to stone. He edged around the corner of the crate stack. Lightning flared overhead, revealing a silhouette 50 feet away, a man in a soaked trench coat, his face obscured by shadow. The gleam of a pistol caught the flash before darkness swallowed it again. Thomas ducked back instantly, pressing his spine against the crate.
His heart hammered. One-armed man, maybe more, and he had no weapon, no plan.
Just the desperate hope the storm might keep them hidden. The footsteps moved again, slow, deliberate. The man wasn't rushing.
He was hunting. Thomas clenched his teeth.
He glanced back toward Lydia, barely visible in the shadows. She was huddled tight, eyes wide, clutching the satchel like a lifeline. He couldn't let the hunter find her. His gaze flicked to the crates around him. Wooden, some marked with faded stencils, machine parts, others with numbers barely visible through grime. One crate sat cracked at the corner, its lid pried loose. Inside, rusted tools glinted faintly. Thomas slid a hand inside, fingers brushing cold metal until they closed around something heavy.
A wrench, thick as his forearm, damp with oil, not a gun.
But it would have to do. He steadied his breath. The footsteps drew closer. Echoes bounced off the cavernous walls, impossible to pinpoint. Thomas tightened his grip on the wrench, muscles taut, waiting for the silhouette to break into view again. Then, silence. He froze, his ears strained. Nothing. Just the storm above and the drip, drip, drip of water leaking from the ceiling. The hunter had stopped moving. Thomas's skin crawled. He inched sideways, peeking around the corner of the crate. Empty. The aisle stretched long, slick with rain leaking through holes in the roof. But no figure moved there. His breath hitched.
"Where?" A whisper of air shifted behind him. Thomas spun instinctively, swinging the wrench. The metal clanged against another piece of steel with a sharp ring that cut through the warehouse. Sparks flew as the hunter's pistol deflected the blow.
The man loomed inches away now, face half lit by lightning. Hard jaw, eyes cold, unblinking. The gun barrel jerked toward Thomas's chest. Thomas lunged. He slammed his shoulder into the man, driving him back into the crates. The gun fired, a deafening crack that tore through the warehouse. The bullet ricocheted somewhere in the dark, shards of crate wood splintering. Thomas grappled, the wrench swinging wild. The man grunted, knee driving upward into Thomas's ribs. Pain exploded through him.
He staggered, breath ragged, but adrenaline shoved him forward again. The pistol came up once more, and Lydia screamed. The sound ripped through the warehouse, sharp and raw.
For the briefest second, the hunter's head turned toward it. It was enough. Thomas swung the wrench with everything he had. It connected with the man's wrist. Bone cracked. The pistol clattered to the floor, skidding under a pallet. The hunter snarled, lashing out with his other fist. Thomas's vision flared white as the punch caught his cheekbone. He reeled backward, tasting copper. But he didn't drop the wrench. He raised it again, ready to bring it down. The hunter stopped moving. Not out of fear.
Out of calculation.
His eyes flicked past Thomas to Lydia, to the satchel clutched in her trembling arms. Then he smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't kind. It was the tight smile of a man who knew how games ended. "Doesn't matter," he said, voice low, accented.
"You can't run forever." Before Thomas could strike, the man turned and bolted into the shadows, clutching his wrist.
His boots pounded against concrete, fading fast. Thomas staggered forward, wrench still raised, but the dark swallowed the hunter whole. Silence crashed back down.
Only rain, only thunder. He lowered the wrench slowly, chest heaving.
His cheek throbbed, ribs burning where the knee had landed. Lydia rushed to him, eyes wide.
"Are you—" "I'm fine," he rasped, though he was anything but. Her hands trembled as they hovered near his face, like she wanted to touch the bruise, but thought better of it. "He saw me."
He saw the bag, Thomas nodded grimly, and he'll bring more next time. They stood in the cavernous dark, the storm echoing overhead. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed faintly through the city, but they didn't bring comfort. They were too far away, too slow. Thomas leaned against the crate, sucking in ragged breaths. The wrench clattered from his hand, ringing once before silence swallowed it. Lydia sank beside him, the satchel still in her lap. Her voice was a whisper. "Why didn't you let him take it?" Thomas looked at her, rain dripping down his temple.
"Because you'd be dead the second you did."
"And I'm not letting them write the ending that easy." Her eyes glistened, not just with stormlight, but with something deeper. Gratitude. But beneath it, fear still ruled. Because she knew.
As did he, this wasn't over. The storm was still building.
The hunters were still out there, and next time they wouldn't come alone. The storm had calmed to a steady drizzle by dawn. Water dripped from the warehouse roof in long, mournful beats, each one echoing through the hollow space. Thomas sat with his back against a stack of crates, his head pounding from the fight, his ribs sore every time he drew breath. Lydia hadn't slept. She sat across from him, legs tucked close, the satchel on her lap, like a child she refused to let go of. Her eyes tracked every sound, every shadow, like the darkness itself might lunge forward and take her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence pressed heavy, filled only by the faint groan of the wind through broken panes. Finally, Thomas broke it.
His voice was low, hoarse. "They'll be back." Lydia didn't argue.
She only tightened her arms around the satchel. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at her with bloodshot eyes.
"I need to know."
"What's in the bag, Lydia? What the hell is all of this?" Her gaze flicked up to meet his, and for a moment he thought she'd brush it off again, offer half answers like she had before. But the fight had changed something. He had seen the hunter's eyes, the way he looked at her. This wasn't random. This wasn't a petty chase. Lydia's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling against the worn leather strap. "It isn't mine," she whispered finally. "But I'm the only one left to protect it," Thomas frowned. "Protect what?" Her eyes darted toward the satchel, then back to him.
"Evidence!" The word landed like a stone between them. Thomas straightened. "Evidence of what?"
She hesitated, then pulled the satchel closer, unbuckling the flap. Inside, paper folders lay thick, their edges damp from the storm. She lifted one, careful like it might shatter, and handed it across to him. Thomas took it reluctantly, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the pages, confusion knotting his brow. Financial documents, ledgers, names and numbers scribbled in tight handwriting, signatures. What am I looking at? Her voice was a thread. Bribes, laundered money, contracts that shouldn't exist. Enough to tear apart men who believe they own this city. Thomas stared at her. The exhaustion in her voice was real. "The terror too. You stole this?" She shook her head. "I was a translator. I worked in the offices where these files passed through. Foreign contracts, hidden clauses, they thought no one would notice."
"But I noticed my father."
"He told me once when I was little, 'Lydia, words are weapons if you know how to use them.' So I copied them, piece by piece."
And then her throat tightened.
She blinked hard, looking away. Thomas leaned closer.
"And then what?"
Her voice cracked when it came.
"They killed him. My father."
He worked for them too until he found out what they were doing. He thought he could walk away.
He thought they would let him. Her hands shook as she clutched the satchel tighter.
They didn't, and when I saw what happened to him, I knew if I stayed quiet, I'd die too. But if I ran with proof, maybe I could make it matter. Thomas's stomach churned. He looked back at the folder, the numbers suddenly carrying weight like lead. This wasn't just paperwork.
This was blood on pages, and the men chasing you?
He asked, her jaw set. The ones named inside. The ones whose empires are built on the lies in those folders. They don't care if they burn the city down to stop me. Thomas sat back heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. Jesus. The warehouse groaned as the wind pushed through it, like even the building was uneasy with her words. He looked at her again, really looked. The exhaustion carved into her cheeks, the raw fear in her eyes, and beneath it all, a stubborn fire that hadn't been extinguished despite everything. She hadn't lied, not once. She had been carrying the weight of all of it alone, running through a storm she couldn't outrun. Thomas felt something stir in his chest, anger, not at her, but at the faceless men who thought they could choke the life out of anyone who stood against them. "You should have gone to the police," he muttered, though even as he said it, he knew it was hollow. Her laugh was brittle, humourless.
You think I didn't try?
The first station I walked into, they called them within the hour.
I barely made it out alive, Thomas cursed under his breath.
Corruption wasn't just ink on the page, it was in the walls of the city itself. He dropped the folder back into the satchel, the weight of it heavier than steel. So what now? You just keep running forever. Her eyes softened, almost pleading. I don't want to run.
I want this to end, but I can't do it alone. The words hit him harder than he expected. He was just a cab driver.
That's all he had been when the night began. A man trying to make enough to pay rent, to cover the bills stacked on his counter. He wasn't supposed to be here, ribs bruised, cheeks swollen, holding evidence that could topple men who thought they were untouchable. But the look in her eyes left no space for retreat. Thomas exhaled slow, the decision carving itself into him even before he said it. All right, he murmured. Then we don't run. We fight. Lydia blinked, stunned.
You don't know what that means? Maybe not, he said, voice firm now.
But I know this. If they want to kill you for telling the truth, then they don't deserve to win.
Not this time.
Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, tears welled, silent, slipping down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed by their betrayal. But Thomas saw them. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she didn't look alone. Outside, the rain softened to mist, the first light of dawn bleeding pale through the high windows. The city stirred awake, but for Thomas and Lydia, the night's fight hadn't ended. It had only shifted, because now the truth was no longer buried in a satchel. It was out loud, shared, alive, and it demanded to be seen. Thomas stood slowly, wincing at his ribs. He extended a hand toward her. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached up and took it. Her grip was strong despite the trembling. When she rose to her feet, something in her posture had changed. She was still afraid, but she wasn't alone anymore. Neither of them spoke as they prepared to leave the warehouse. The storm had left the streets slick, but the air was clear. The city beyond the walls wasn't ready for what they carried. But ready or not, they were stepping into it together, and the men who hunted them would soon learn. Truth has a way of surviving storms. The morning city looked washed raw by the storm. Streets gleamed with thin films of water. Gutters overflowed, and the sky hung grey and heavy, like it hadn't quite decided whether to clear or drown them again. Thomas's cab sat a block away, parked beneath the sagging shadow of a lamp post. It looked almost absurd in its ordinariness, yellow paint chipped, a faint dent in the rear bumper, like it had no business being part of what was about to come. But it was all they had. Lydia slid into the back seat, clutching the satchel to her chest. Her face was pale, her dark hair tangled from the long night, but her eyes held something new: resolve. Thomas took the wheel, rubbing the bruise on his cheekbone once before turning the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, coughing but steady. He gripped the wheel tighter than usual, knuckles pale. "Where to?" he asked. Her answer was immediate. "The courthouse." Thomas glanced back at her in the rear view. "You're sure?" "Broad daylight, center of the city. That's the first place they'll look." Her voice didn't waver. "That's the point."
If I disappear in shadows, they'll say I never existed.
"But if I walk through the front doors, if I hand this over in front of everyone, they can't silence it so easily." He held her gaze for a beat, then nodded. "Courthouse it is." The cab rolled forward, tires hissing over wet asphalt. For a time, the ride was quiet. The city slowly came alive around them. Shopkeepers dragging metal shutters upward, workers in damp coats rushing for buses, steam curling from sewer grates, ordinary lives moving forward, oblivious to the storm still raging between two fugitives in a yellow taxi. But Thomas felt the tension coiled tighter with every block. Every intersection, every shadowed alley, they could be there. And then he saw them. A black sedan idling too casually at the corner, its windows tinted dark. As the cab passed, the sedan pulled out. Thomas's gut clenched. "They've found us," he muttered. Lydia twisted in her seat, eyes wide.
Are you sure?
The sedan turned when they turned, kept its distance, but not enough. A shadow inside shifted, a glint of something metallic catching the grey light. Thomas's hands tightened on the wheel. "I'm sure." The chase was quiet at first, almost polite, the cab weaving through morning traffic, the sedan trailing like a shadow stitched to their bumper. But the silence broke 2 blocks later, when another car joined, dark, low, sliding in from the cross street. And then a third. Lydia's voice cracked.
They're boxing us in, Thomas's jaw locked.
He slammed the accelerator, the cab lurching forward. Horns blared as they cut through traffic, tires screeching over slick pavement. The city became a blur. Lights, faces, rain-slicked glass. Behind them, the sedans surged closer, their engines deep.
Hungry. A voice rose from Lydia's throat, strangled by fear. We'll never make it.
Thomas didn't look back. "Yes, we will." He swung the cab hard right, narrowly missing a delivery truck. The tires skidded, hydroplaned for a heart-stopping second before catching grip again. The cab roared down a side street, the sedans in hot pursuit. Every nerve in Thomas's body screamed, but his mind burned clear.
Every corner, every turn of the wheel, this was his world.
The city was his map, his veins. He knew its shortcuts, its alleys, its back streets like scars on his own skin. He cut left, then right, threading through gaps that no sane driver would attempt. The cab rattled, suspension groaning, but it held. The sedans stayed close, too close. Bullets shattered the silence. Glass cracked at the rear window, shards raining into the back seat. Lydia screamed, ducking low, clutching the satchel like a shield. Thomas gritted his teeth, muscles burning as he forced the cab faster. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, but too far to matter. They tore through the city, predator and prey, locked in desperate pursuit. Thomas's breath came sharp, his ribs stabbing with every inhale, but he kept going, and then, ahead, the courthouse. Its stone steps rose like a fortress at the end of the boulevard, the American flag snapping sharp against the damp wind. Thomas felt it like a lifeline. "We're here!" Lydia cried, eyes shining with hope. But hope turned to dread instantly. Another sedan screeched in from the side, cutting across their path, blocking the courthouse steps. Thomas's heart slammed against his ribs. They were trapped. For a second, the world seemed to freeze, the courthouse looming, the cars closing in, Lydia's ragged breath in the back seat. Thomas's knuckles tightened on the wheel. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Hold on." He slammed the accelerator. The cab roared forward, engine screaming. The sedan ahead tried to cut closer, its grille flashing like bared teeth, but Thomas didn't slow. Metal collided with a bone-rattling crunch. The cab's bumper slammed into the sedan's side, shoving it sideways with raw, reckless force. Tires squealed. The cab lurched, but Thomas held it steady, muscling through the block. The sedan spun, skidding across the slick pavement, slamming into a lamp-post.
Sparks erupted.
The way was clear. Thomas shot the cab up the courthouse steps, the vehicle bouncing, jarring every bone in their bodies. The cab slammed to a halt at the top, smoke rising from its hood. Silence fell, broken only by the hissing engine. Lydia stared, stunned, then looked at him with trembling awe. You did it," Thomas didn't answer. His chest heaved, his vision swimming, but he forced himself to move. He shoved the door open, stumbling out onto the stone steps. Lydia followed, clutching the satchel. The courthouse doors loomed above them, heavy and tall. But behind, engines revved again. Doors slammed. Boots pounded. They were coming. Thomas turned, putting himself between Lydia and the men spilling out of the sedans. Guns gleamed in the grey light.
Faces twisted with fury. His body ached, bruised, broken, but he stood his ground. "Go!" he rasped to Lydia. "Run!" Her voice shook.
"Not without you," the men advanced. 10 of them now, fanning out across the steps. Their leader stepped forward, coat hanging open, pistol raised. His voice was calm, almost amused. "You really thought you could win, cab driver?" Thomas stared at him, blood on his lips, fire in his eyes. "No, but I thought I could slow you down." The leader's smile faltered, just as a sound split the morning air. Sirens, dozens of them. Squad cars barreled into the boulevard, lights flashing, tires screeching. Armed officers poured out, weapons raised. The hunters froze, caught between their prey and a sudden storm of law. Lydia didn't waste a second. She bolted up the last few steps, shoving through the courthouse doors with the satchel clutched high.
Her voice rang out, desperate, defiant. "I have evidence! They can't silence me anymore."
The words echoed through the great hall beyond, carrying into microphones, cameras, ears that couldn't unhear them. The hunters on the steps cursed, some turning to run, others raising weapons, only to be met with a wall of armed police. The leader glared at Thomas, fury burning in his eyes. "This isn't over." Thomas wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, standing tall despite the pain. "It is for you." The courthouse doors shut behind Lydia, sealing her inside the safety of the law, the weight of her evidence no longer hidden. Thomas exhaled, his body trembling. The long night finally crashing down, the storm was over. He had been just a taxi driver, a man with debts, with ordinary struggles, with no reason to step into someone else's war. But one ride, one choice, had changed everything. And as he stood on those courthouse steps, battered but unbroken, he realized the truth. Sometimes the smallest lives become the line between silence and survival, between lies and justice. Sometimes it only takes a driver willing to take the fare.